Hello and welcome to BTA. My name is Emmanuel Abuaji-Riafe. Now, come December 2nd to 4th, IQPC Middle East is organizing an international conference in Ghana dubbed Made in Ghana Conference. One of the key speakers is the president of the African Youth. The president and CEO of African Youth Leadership for Change Network, Paul Drapson, has joined me here in the studio to talk about the summit. Hi, Paul, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, tell us more about the Made in Ghana Summit coming on in December this year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, the Made in Ghana Summit has become very necessary because of some of the key challenges that we've been having for quite some time now, not only in Ghana, but in Africa as a whole. Somewhere last year, for instance, as at the end of the first quarter of last year, a research that had been conducted revealed that around that period, we had a little over 2.5 million people who were unemployed in the UK alone. Again, around that same period, that is as at the end of the first quarter of 2013, in the Eurozone, the unemployment figure had increased by 95,000 people. Around that same period, again, you realize that the number of people who were unemployed in the United States of America was a little over 13 million people. And I'm sure definitely everybody will be interested in knowing how the figures looks like in Africa. And it's quite alarming because as at the end of the first quarter of 2013, we had a little over 40 million people in Africa who were unemployed, out of which 60% constituted the youth, which is very alarming. And so for me, I find this Made in Ghana conference being organized by IQPC Middle East as a very timely conference, because the main essence of the conference is to enlighten the people of Ghana and the people of Africa when it comes to various opportunities when we talk about local content in the oil and gas sector as well as in the mining sector.
Now, since the inception of Ghana's oil and gas industry, several conferences have been organized in the country on various topics within the industry. Now, why should we take the Made in Ghana Summit as a very, very exceptional and a relevant conference?
Thank you very much. I mean, like you rightly said, I mean, since Ghana started oil production in massive quantities during the latter part of 2010, of course, quite a number of conferences and summits, oil and gas summits and conferences have been organized. But I believe strongly that if you look at most of the oil and gas conferences and summits that have been organized, most often you realize that either they focus on the upstream or they focus on the downstream, or possibly sometimes maybe they focus on the middle stream. But for this particular summit, you realize that this summit is looking at dealing with issues that cuts across the entire oil and gas value chain. Is a summit that seeks to look at issues relating to the upstream, issues relating to the downstream, as well as issues relating to the middle stream. And so for me, I believe that once this summit focuses on dealing with issues that cuts across the entire value chain within the oil and gas industry, it makes it very unique. Number two, if you look at the quality of people, the quality of facilitators, the quality of resource people who are coming, I believe strongly that anybody who registers to participate in this upcoming conference will definitely go home enlightened and will definitely go home with something in his pocket. For instance, I mean, we have people like Honorable Moses Asaga, I mean, currently the chairman for National Petroleum Authority. I mean, who is going to be there? I mean, you look at people like Shika Kolache, who is also currently the director, the country director for Enterprise Development Foundation. I mean, we have people like Dr. Durban, who is also currently the CSR manager for Fidelity Bank. I'm also aware that the deputy managing director for UT Bank is going to be there. I'm also aware that the local content manager for Tallow Oil is going to be there. Of course, I'm even aware that the Minister of Energy, Honorable Kofi Boah, is going to be there. And I'm also reliably informed that even the Vice President of Ghana, His Excellency Pakwesi Misata, is also going to be there. So I believe strongly that if we look at the quality of facilitators and resource people who are going to be there at this conference, then I believe strongly that this conference is unique.
Sounds very comprehensive.
Yes.
Now, what area are you going to address? I mean, which particular topic that are you going to discuss at the summit?
Thank you very much. I mean, like we said earlier, quite a number of things will be addressed during the summit. But specifically, I will be dealing with the topic making the local content more relevant. Now, the reason why it has become very important to make the local content more relevant is because you will realize that as of 2010, what Ghana, for instance, had was a local content policy. But fortunately for us, on the 19th of November 2013, the local content law was officially endorsed and officially became a law. And the law took effect from February 2014. Now you realize that it is completely different dealing with a policy as compared to dealing with a law. If you fail to comply with the guidelines as contained in the policy, you may not necessarily probably be sanctioned. You are not under any obligation to undergo any kind of sanction, for instance, if you fail to abide by guidelines, I mean, being provided by a policy. But if you fail to go according to the laid down rules that governs the industry, then definitely you may find yourself in a very, very unpleasant situation. So for me, I believe strongly that the mere fact that Ghana as a nation now have a local content law means that we have a great opportunity to ensure that we make the local content, I mean, more relevant. For instance, a research was conducted somewhere 2010, and it revealed that between 2012, and it revealed that between 2010 and 2012, the government of Ghana had sponsored not less than 2,000 Ghanaians to travel abroad to study, I mean, all kinds of oil and gas programs, as well as, I mean, oil and gas related programs. Of course, I believe that between 2012 and 2014, definitely the figures have gone up. But the question you and I must ask ourselves is that if between 2010 and 2012, the government of Ghana had sponsored about 2,000 Ghanaians to travel abroad to go and study various oil and gas programs, the question we must ask ourselves is that to what extent is the country, or to what extent is our oil industry benefiting from the expertise that these people have acquired as a result of the training that they had to undergo, which was sponsored using the ordinary taxpayers' money. So for me, I believe strongly that we need to look at various opportunities. For instance, if you look at the local content law, the local content law spells out various opportunities within the oil and gas sector. I mean, somewhere 2013, I recall very well, on the 9th of July on 2013, if you check the banner headline of business, graphic business, there's a newspaper by name Graphic Business. If you check the banner headline of Graphic Business on the 9th of July 2013, you will realize that the banner headline is very clear, that 3,500 mining workers to be laid off. And when I took the pains to read the story, I discovered that the reason why a lot of mining companies were thinking of laying off people whose number was up to about 3,500 was simply because, according to most of the mining companies, since 1982, this is the first time that gold prices have fallen drastically on the international world market. And because as much as possible they want to minimize the cost of doing business, they felt that one of the major ways by which they can minimize the cost of doing business is to lay off people. And so for me, I believe that we must begin to look at opportunities that are available that the local content law presents to us.
Right. Now, another interesting aspect is the fact that Ghana, before the onset of oil and gas, had agriculture as the mainstay of the country's economy. Now, some people have speculated that there is the risk of relegating agriculture to the background and focusing more on oil and gas. Now, with local content, what do you think are some of the ways that will highlight on integrating these very two critical, sectors of the economy, agriculture and oil and gas?
Thank you very much. For instance, if you take a look at the purpose of the local content regulation, if you look at the local content law, there is one heading which reads the purpose of the local content regulation. If you look at one of the purposes of the local content regulation, it talks about the fact that all oil companies are expected to patronize their goods and services which they are supposed to use in their activities. They are supposed to patronize them from Ghanaians. Now, what this means is that this presents a clear opportunity to the Ghanaian people, especially Ghanaian entrepreneurs. Now, if you look at the issue which you just mentioned, of course, which has to do with the Dutch disease, the fact that, I mean, we must not focus all our attention on one particular sector of the economy to the neglect of other sectors of the economy. Earlier on, I mentioned that, for instance, if you look at the oil and gas industry, we can talk about the oil and gas value chain. Now, the value chain within the oil and gas industry is very broad and very comprehensive. For instance, you realize that within the oil and gas industry, we have the technical sector, we have the management sector, then we also have what we call the support services sector. You realize that the support services sector is a sector which is not directly involved in oil and gas production. But then the activities of the support sector contributes largely to those in the upstream and downstream to be able to effectively do their job. I mean, I recall some few months ago, I discovered that, for instance, there is a hotel in the western region where oil production is currently ongoing close to the Jubilee field. I discovered that an oil company had paid the hotel management to use their hotel facility for 3 years. I mean, they have paid the hotel that for the next 3 years, we want to use your hotel facilities. So you realize that even though that hotel is not directly involved in oil production, but their hotel, their facilities is offering support to oil and gas workers. And so they are part of the oil and gas value chain. For instance, if you look at, I mean, people who have to go on the high seas to go and drill oil and what have you, sometimes they have to be on the high seas for about 3 weeks. The question you and I may have to ask ourselves is that for 3 good weeks when they are going to be on the high seas to drill oil, to produce oil and what have you, won't they eat? Definitely they would eat. That means that there will be the need for catering services to be able to provide food that they will be eating for 3 weeks. Of course, at the end of the day, you and I know that in order for us to be able to eat, we need to get the raw materials from agriculture. Right. And so what this means is that if we really want to focus on the oil and gas value chain, then it means that we cannot say we are focusing solely on oil production, because definitely the upstream industry or the downstream industry cannot effectively, I mean, function without receiving massive support from the support services.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. Now, who should attend the summit?
Well, thank you very much. I believe strongly that this summit is a summit for everybody. I mean, some people are tempted to think that the summit is for only people within the oil and gas industry or people within the mining industry. But let me clarify that the summit is not only limited to people within the oil and gas industry or people within the mining industry, even though, of course, the mining industry and the oil and gas industry will be some of the major industries that will be highlighted. But of course, I mean, it is not limited to only these two industries. And so I want to encourage as many people as possible to make it a point to be part of this summit, because believe you me, when we talk about local content, a lot of people are tempted to think that local content has to do with oil and gas companies or mining companies offering job opportunities to the local people. But let me say that offering job opportunities to local people is only a small aspect of local content. So I believe strongly that a lot of us are very much limited in scope when it comes to what local content is all about. And so when we take this conference or this summit as an opportunity to come and explore, as an opportunity to come and be enlightened, I believe strongly that this summit will be a way by which a lot of Ghanaians, a lot of Africans will be enlightened and will get to know what local content is really all about. And they will also be able to discover how they can also take advantage of various opportunities, I mean, within the oil and gas industry, within the mining industry, and even, I mean, when it comes to other industries. So for me, I believe strongly that any African, I mean, who is interested in taking advantage of available opportunities when it comes to enhancing economic development, when it comes to enhancing, I mean, the national development of their, I mean, individual countries, I believe strongly that this is a summit which they must take advantage of.
Finally, before you go, when it comes to resource cares, I think that Ghana is in a better position to learn from test cases surrounding it, and for instance, Nigeria's situation and others. And the fact that we have had in place a protracted mining industry with its challenges and lessons. How can we draw lessons from the mining industries, for instance, on oil and gas?
Thank you very much. I mean, this is a very, very brilliant question which you have asked. I remember very well that about 4 years ago, I think somewhere in 2010, I attended a national stakeholders summit which was organized by Anglo Gold Ashanti. And basically, the main purpose of the summit was for them to enlighten us and to tell us to tell the various stakeholders with regards to what is happening when it comes to the mining industry. And I recall that during the summit, it was indicated clearly that since Ghana started mining gold, as at 2010, we had actually mined up to 30 million ounces of gold. And according to the same, I mean, information that I gathered from the summit, it was also indicated that we had reserves of 9 million ounces of gold left. So I remember very well that the question I asked was that if we have mined gold for a long time, for quite a number of years, and we have mined 30 million ounces of gold, for which you and I can confidently say that Ghana as a nation has not benefited in any way from the mining of gold, what measures are we going to put in place to ensure that the remaining 9 million ounces of gold left will be used judiciously and in a sustainable manner to ensure that, I mean, the present generation and future generations of Ghanaians will be able to benefit from the remaining 9 million ounces of gold? And that was the question I asked. And so, like you rightly said, I mean, if you look at countries like Nigeria and Angola, they have made countless mistakes. And of course, it's acceptable, because if you look at a country like Nigeria, they have been mining oil since the 1950s. And so it is very normal that definitely between 1950 and 2014, definitely they would have made a couple of mistakes. And that is why Ghana as a nation, I always say wherever I find myself, that we are very fortunate and privileged. Because when countries like Nigeria began oil production, they did not have anybody to look up to. Of course, we may say that countries like Oman, countries like Libya, and other countries in the Middle East were already producing oil at the time that Nigeria started. Of course, it is true, but it is very important to also note that the terrain in Europe or in Middle East is completely different from the terrain in Africa. And so, unfortunately, at the time that countries like Nigeria began, they did not have anybody to look up to. But fortunately for Ghana, we have started at a time when we have other people to look up to and to draw lessons from. I mean, lastly, let me say that if you look at a country like Nigeria, Nigeria has for quite a number of years always remained the #1 oil producing nation in Africa. But in 2009, for some reason, Nigeria dropped from being the first African I mean, from being the first highest producing oil producing country in Africa to the second largest oil producing country in Africa. Angola rose from being the second largest producer of oil in Africa to being the first largest producer of oil in Africa. The main reason was because the people within the Ogoni state, the people within the Niger Delta area where oil production was going on massively, felt very aggrieved. The reason why they were aggrieved was because their main source of livelihood was farming. Because of the oil production and oil activities, their farmlands were destroyed. They were expecting that, of course, the oil companies and the people responsible for oil production would have found a way of probably getting them an alternative source of livelihood. Unfortunately, they couldn't get any alternative source of livelihood. And it became very, very difficult for them to take care of themselves and take care of their families. And as a result, they took to the streets and destroyed some of the oil infrastructure. And just because of the destruction of some of the oil infrastructure, it led to a decline of oil production in Nigeria. And as a result, for the first time in history, Nigeria dropped to number 2 largest oil producing country in Africa, and Angola rose to be the number 1 oil producing country in Africa. So for me, I believe strongly that all these things are lessons that Ghana as a nation can learn. Not only Ghana, but of course, you realize that countries like Ivory Coast, countries like Uganda, countries like Nigeria, countries like Kenya, countries like Mozambique have recently also discovered oil and natural gas in commercial quantities and will soon be starting production. And so all these things are case studies for countries like Ghana and the other countries I have mentioned to learn from.
Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we hope to see you at the summit.
Definitely. And I hope to see you there as well.
Definitely, I will. I will be there. So my guest has been the President and CEO of African Youth Leadership for Change Network, Paul Drapson, talking to me on BTA. My name is Emmanuel Apwajiri. Have a nice day. Have a nice day because you're in a day. I'm sure. What about edit it? Hey.
Still over 40 million people in Africa who were unemployed, out of which 60% constituted the youth, which is very alarming. And so for me, I find this Made in Ghana conference being organized by IQPC Middle East as a very timely conference, because the main essence of the conference is to enlighten the people of Ghana and the people of Africa when it comes to various opportunities when we talk about local content in the oil and gas sector as well as in the mining sector.
Now, since the inception of Ghana's oil and
people who were unemployed in the UK alone, again, around that same period, that is as at the end of the first quarter of 2013, in the Eurozone, the unemployment figure had increased by 95,000 people. Around that same period, again, you realize that the number of people who were unemployed in the United States of America was a little over 13 million people. And I'm sure definitely everybody will be interested in knowing how the figures looks like in Africa. And it's quite alarming because as at the end of the first quarter of 2013, we had a little...
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now tell us more about the Made in Ghana Summit coming on in December this year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, the Made in Ghana Summit has become very necessary because of some of the key challenges that we've been having for quite some time now, not only in Ghana, but in Africa as a whole. Somewhere last year, for instance, as at the end of the first quarter of last year, a research that had been conducted revealed that around that period, we had a little over 2.5 million people.
Hello and welcome to BTA. My name is Emmanuel Apwajiri. Now, come December 2nd to 4th, IQPC Middle East is organizing an international conference in Ghana dubbed Made in Ghana Conference. One of the key speakers is the president of the African Youth. One of the key speakers, the president and CEO of African Youth Leadership for Change Network, Paul Drapson, has joined me here in the studio to talk about the summit. Hi, Paul. Gas industry, several conferences have been organized in the country on various topics within the industry. Now, why should we take the Made in Ghana Summit as a very, very exceptional and a relevant conference?
Thank you very much. I mean, like you rightly said, I mean, since Ghana started oil production in massive quantities during the latter part of 2010, of course, quite a number of conferences and summits, oil and gas summits and conferences have been organized. But I believe strongly that if you look at most of